Uber and Lyft has just been aggressively roasted by a Massachusetts auditor, and this is a big deal. You can see right here that a Massachusetts auditor report slams Uber, Lyft worker misclassification scheme. So going down here, today, Massachusetts State Auditor Deanna DiZoglio, I'm probably butchering her name, I apologize, released an official report documenting how companies like Uber and Lyft have treated the state's employee protection programs out of hundreds of millions of dollars by misclassifying workers as independent contractors. And this is a big kicker. According to conservative estimates, Uber and Lyft have avoided paying more than $266 million into the state's workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, and paid family leave programs over the past 10 years, which technically includes when I was driving, because that was, included in this 10 years ago, and including an estimated $47 million in 2023 alone. What's kind of wild about this, and I've said this before in other videos when I've done news stories or covered news stories in other areas, is remember, any single time something happens with Uber and Lyft in one area, it does have a ripple effect around the rest of the country. And I hate to say it, and I'll talk about this at the end of this video in terms of my recap of this full article. This is something we're seeing a lot more. This is not like I could probably input any other state. Obviously, this is something that's very interesting to me because, I was driving in 2015 and 2016 and stuff like that, when it comes to Uber and Lyft. So, and this is also when I started driving too, right in Massachusetts. That's where I grew up. And so it's just interesting to me that you're just seeing this now in so many different places where, like I said, I could replace Massachusetts with probably a bajillion other states, and the article could read potentially the exact same, right? And going down here, this is a report, right? It did not include how much money worker misclassification has cost the state and other programs like food and healthcare insurance. But here's the big thing, is that the state auditor's report exposes the true cost of worker misclassification. Companies like Uber and Lyft are exploiting workers and taxpayers in the name of innovation and convenience. These greedy corporations must be held accountable. Labor legislation must change to ensure employers take full responsibility for their employees and follow the laws like everybody else. The Teamsters strongly encourage all states to conduct similar audits as Massachusetts. Like I said, this is causing and potentially will cause a massive ripple effect. I just posted a video, I think it was like yesterday, talking about the 5 main reasons why I would never drive for Uber and Lyft ever again. And the first thing I brought up was this whole status confusion of being like, wait, are rideshare drivers independent contractors or employees? But if they do get classified as independent contractors, it's this huge mess because then Uber and Lyft has a bigger stance to not treat their drivers fairly. And this article is kind of exactly bringing that up, saying, wow, Uber and Lyft owes a lot of money to Massachusetts and potentially a lot of other states. Big tech is fleeking the American people. Is that how you pronounce that word? I don't think I've ever seen that word. And we need the whole of the government to take the right position and fight back, right? And you can see all these different reports. The report confirms Uber and Lyft are stealing wages from workers and operating as wholesale tax cheats at the same time. They're getting away with highway robbery, depriving the Commonwealth of Massachusetts of millions of dollars in tax revenue, and financing multi-million-dollar campaigns to sidestep our laws. That's true. They did the same thing in California with Prop 22, right? These employers must acknowledge and take care of their employees. Anything else is a scam, right? And going down here, that the Teamsters endorsement, the Edwards-Vargas legislation, which is something that's being put forward, comes amid a push by tech giants like Uber and Lyft and Instacart to force a referendum on the November ballot. So basically, Uber, Lyft, and Instacart, these kind of gig economy jobs, want to basically be the exception to the rule, right? Very similar to what happened here in California, unfortunately, with AB 5. Prop 22 was that one exception. And they're saying, if passed, it would validate many app-based companies' unlawful business models. Very similar to, let's say, here in California, what Uber and Lyft kind of want to be like, hey, we want to be the exception to the rule. We get that all these other companies have to treat their employees fairly, but we want to be the exception to the rule, right? And again, it would validate many app-based companies' unlawful business models, which exploits misclassification to deprive workers of collective bargaining rights, minimum wage protections, overtime eligibility, unemployment insurance, and other benefits reserved for W-2 employees. And this is pretty crazy. It was kind of, it's been kind of tough for me, being honest. And I've mentioned this already in a few videos where I feel like I sound like a broken record. But I've said a lot, like, look, I think there's a lot of good Uber and Lyft has done. And I like to be very honest in my videos and transparent. But at the same time, it's tough for me to be both transparent without also being negative. Like, I feel like Uber and Lyft, although they have done a lot of good, and I genuinely think they have, it's tough for me to continue making these videos. And I keep saying, like, maybe Uber and Lyft will change. Maybe there'll be a positive news story about Uber and Lyft. And then there's just one negative story after the other. And I hate to say it, that this situation isn't all that mind-blowing to any drivers. I guarantee all my drivers right now watching this video are saying, no surprise to us, makes complete sense that, 266, that they have avoided paying more than $266 million into state workers' compensation, right? That's also a conservative estimate. It could be a lot more than that, right? That's a very, very conservative estimate. This is not too surprising, not just in Massachusetts, but everywhere else. And like this article's kind of pointed, it kind of went pretty hard into Uber and Lyft about how much they've taken advantage of their drivers, how much they've taken advantage of the system, the taxpayers, and basically the entire state of Massachusetts. This has been a very, I'd say, like, from a meta perspective, big issue that I've noticed. That when a bill gets passed forward saying, hey, we need to protect workers more across the board, every job, every industry, every profession, we need to protect workers more. It's always Uber and Lyft, I'll say ride sharing, but it's pretty much just Uber and Lyft, that are the exception to the rule. Like I just said, what happened here in California, Prop 22 was the exception to AB 5 just for ride sharing. And is getting, I'd say from my perspective, reviewing, I've probably read hundreds upon hundreds of articles now. I would not even be surprised if I've read over 1,000 articles about Uber and Lyft and the economics and what's going on. It is interesting to me that Uber and Lyft always has to be the exception, and I hate to say it, a lot of times they are. Now, granted, I think it's important to look on both sides, and I try to do that as much as I can to look at things objectively, and it does make some sense, right? That when it comes to ride sharing, it is a bit of a gray area. It's a grayer area than most other professions, which we can clearly say they're definitely an independent contractor or they're definitely an employee. Ride sharing is a bit of a gray area. That's why, like I said, in that video I just posted about the 5 reasons why I will never be an Uber driver or a Lyft driver ever again, the first thing I talked about was the status confusion. It's this gray area, which when things are vague and you don't know exactly, that can cause issues. And then even when things get solved and become more black or white, where you are, like, say, an independent contractor, Uber and Lyft now takes even more advantage of the drivers. It's just not the position you want to be in. And if anything, and I've said this in other videos as well, I almost feel like Uber and Lyft is creating their own category, for better or for worse, where you're almost independent contractors with benefits, right? You're not independent contractors, you're not employees, you're independent contractors with benefits, right? And I said this before, it's kind of a similar, I guess, analogy where it's like, you're not single, you're not dating in a relationship, you're like in a situationship or friends with benefits, whatever. I guess that's like a term a lot of people use now, is situationship. Kind of similar to that, right? And I think that in some ways, some drivers are like, hey, I want to continue being an independent contractor. I like that aspect. Other drivers are like, no, I want to be an employee. So I know this is a huge debate even among drivers. I used to be on the stance that I think drivers should be employees so they get protections. I've kind of rolled that back. Now my stance has changed, where I feel like if there's a way for drivers to get protection and truly get protection in terms of paid sick leave, unemployment, if they get deactivated, can they get some compensation back, health insurance, all this other stuff. If they're able to get that and be an independent contractor, well, hey, that's the best of both worlds. That would be the optimal situation. It's a win-win for everybody, right? Potentially including Uber and Lyft as well. Is that going to happen, though? I don't know. It could be at the point where someone says, you know what? No, there's not going to be this weird gray area. We got to make drivers employees now, or independent contractors, or whatever, because Uber and Lyft continues to take advantage of their drivers. And a big debate upon this, right, especially what's going on in Massachusetts. Like I said, the bill's being put forward, I think it's this November, to make sure that people, workers in every profession, gets paid the amount they should be getting paid. It's very similar to AB5 here in California. And of course, like I showed you, Uber and Lyft is arguing now, and Instacart as well, that they should be the exceptions to the rule. And again, it's always Uber and Lyft being the one exception to the rule. I guess you could include Instacart or delivery driving. Or I guess it's a little bit different than delivery. It's more like grocery delivery type thing. But even still, it's always Uber and Lyft that happens to be the exception to the rule. And that's super frustrating, right? And I think, as they said, a lot of other states might look at this and say, you know what? They did an audit. They had someone who does this professionally. And I actually used to be an auditor. They had someone audit and they realized, damn, Lyft and Uber for hundreds of millions of dollars has taken advantage of the state, their drivers, their workers, etc. Maybe other states will follow suit and also do the same exact type of auditing structure and procedure and realize, wow, it's not just Massachusetts, it's everywhere. And that could easily be the case. And what's tough about this as well, that's another argument that's been brought up by Uber and Lyft. And I don't know the exact right answer to it, although I have my own perspectives, is Uber and Lyft, when this kind of stuff gets brought up, a lot of times they say, hey, Uber and Lyft, you need to pay your drivers better. You need to do this, you need to do that. And Uber and Lyft's stance has been, you know what? We do our job. You're a lawmaker. Lawmakers should not get involved with what businesses do. Lawmakers should not get involved with the way businesses work and everything. We set our prices the way we set them. We do our thing. Basically, we do our own thing. You do your thing. Leave us alone. And on one end, I kind of get that stance that, of course, lawmakers are not rideshare companies. Yes, I do get that one argument. But on the other end, when you have case after case after case after case of drivers being treated horribly by Uber and Lyft, when you have all these cases of Uber and Lyft being American companies treating their drivers badly, you do borderline on this potential illegal thing. Now, granted, do I want to go and say that it's like the way they're treating their drivers is full on illegal? Tough to say. I'm not a lawyer and I don't pretend to be one. So it could be illegal. It could also be a gray area where it's not illegal, but it's messed up. I honestly don't know, right? But there's been enough talk of this. And also I'd say enough evidence, especially with this auditor, I butchered her name, Diana. I'll just use her first name. I know I probably butchered her last name, so I apologize. But doing all this extensive research, you realize, wow, when you look at everything, yeah, Uber and Lyft are actually taking advantage of people, and this is super messed up, and I can't believe that we're allowing this. And other states should follow suit and also conduct their own audits, right? It's just a big deal because I feel like, over the years, and I just mentioned this again, it's kind of ironic to do a review of this news article considering the video I just posted, but I said that when I first started driving, it was the glory days of being an Uber Lyft driver. And then things got progressively worse in numerous arenas. But I've also noticed, and I've said this as well, I think one other time, is there's got to be a point where I feel like, not saying we hit rock bottom, like that SpongeBob episode, but maybe. I think there's going to be a point where ridesharing hits a point where it's the worst time to ever be a rideshare driver. And I hate to say it, I think we might be in that. I feel like there's never been a worse time to be a rideshare driver than right now. And I feel like with stuff being put forward like this, it could be that they're like, hey, you know what? Enough is enough. We got to make ride sharing better for the drivers, right? And, it's a frustrating situation because I do hope things change. I mean, you look at what's happening in Minneapolis. It could be a federal thing being put forward as well, like I mentioned, of maybe a federal minimum wage for rideshare drivers. I don't know. It's tough because rideshare drivers continually are being treated worse and worse and worse. And then again, like I said with Minneapolis, they were going to put forward something of drivers getting their minimum wage or minimum hourly guarantee. That got taken away. But you see these kind of stories popping up more and more. You see these kind of stories popping up more and more and more. And in addition, like I said, with this huge study, there's a study done, I mentioned in a couple of videos, where they looked at over 1 billion rides, 1 billion rideshare rides, and they found out through meta-analysis that if Lyft and Uber, let's say, had to pay a minimum wage or had to give benefits, they would be able to do so. The drivers would be able to make the money they should be able to make. Everyone would go home happy, right? Because Uber and Lyft's argument, in this case in Massachusetts, to be the exception to the rule, when Prop 22 existed here in California, when everything happened in New York was what's going on in Minneapolis. Their argument is if, like, say, drivers do get protection, that means the amount that each ride is going to cost is going to go up, which means that people might take Ubers and Lyfts less, and then therefore drivers make less because there's less rides on the road, or basically this is going to hurt everybody. But for what it seems like through that huge study, it was over 1 billion rides that were studied, that wasn't the case, right? And so in places like Minneapolis or Massachusetts, it could be that this whole talk of becoming an employee or getting benefits or a minimum wage or a minimum hourly guarantee or however they're going to structure it, I think is becoming a lot more feasible, right? But I just got to say, I said it before and I'll say it again, that this ripple effect, like I've talked about, is now spreading a lot more rapidly. Minneapolis, Massachusetts, California, New York, the ball is rolling quicker and quicker, and it's, becoming this massive snowball effect. And it just brings up this big question. Could something happen federally with ride sharing? With Massachusetts now really going hard into Lyft and Uber when it comes to this big audit, with them suggesting it for other states. Could it go from just a state-to-state thing, which I will say is kind of weird. It is kind of weird. And I know this is a typical thing in America, right? If you look at a lot of these controversial topics, right? So I'm not going to touch upon them, but it is kind of interesting that a lot of times it is a state versus state thing, that two different states can act and operate and have laws like two separate different countries even. And that's true especially for ride sharing, of course. But could it be that with all this talk and all this commotion now really going on, which I think is a good thing, I think it's good that we're having these conversations, could it be that a federal thing would be put or could potentially be put into place? It is all tough to say, but I just gotta say that this story, like I said, talking about Massachusetts, you could potentially replace the word Massachusetts or the state Massachusetts with almost every other state, and this type of article could be the exact same.